Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. It was a wonderful autumn day. Against the backdrop of the blue sky, a warm glow emanated from the trees, covered in gold and crimson. The transparent air was intoxicating with its freshness, the smells of damp earth and fallen leaves. In the old park, a man sat on a bench watching a large Labrador. The dog, with its luxurious golden fur shining under the rays of the unusually bright autumn sun, was clearly enjoying itself, running between the trees across a carpet of fallen leaves. Suddenly, it braked sharply and with full force plunged into a pile of fallen leaves, burying itself head first and raising a multicolored whirlwind around itself. Crouching low to the ground, the dog froze and looked at its owner. "Well, why are you sitting there glued? Come here, let's jump together. It's so much fun," the dog's gaze seemed to say. The dog snorted loudly several times, trying to free its nose from the clinging cobwebs and bits of leaves. Grabbing a small branch, it dashed towards the bench where its owner was sitting. "Well, old friend?" Robert stroked the dog that had run up to him with affection. With a neat movement, he wiped the cobweb from its nose, smiling. "You're acting like a puppy today." The dog lifted its muzzle, and large, shining eyes stared into Robert's face. Its tail wagged furiously, and its whole body twitched impatiently, anticipating play. It crouched down, lifted a paw, and looking questioningly at the man, whined softly. "Calm down," Robert laughed cheerfully. "What's with this burst of youth today? Did you come here to play with me? No, I can't right now. It will pass, then others will be jumping, but around me." Robert laughed quietly again, but this time the laugh sounded bitter. "If only David were here with us. He would run with you." Robert suddenly fell silent. His face twitched as if in pain, and he added, pushing the words out with difficulty, "And if his mother were here with us, she would, I'm sure, jump with you. I remember all your tricks. She taught you, didn't she?" The dog, hearing the sounds of a beloved voice and apparently catching the familiar intonations, whimpered. It wagged its tail furiously and sat down next to the bench, still holding the broken branch in its teeth. Obviously, it hadn't given up hope of involving its owner in a fun game, but just sitting nearby and feeling the touch, it was clearly happy. Robert continued to stroke the dog's head mechanically, habitually running the silky ears between his fingers. He inhaled a portion of the delicious fresh autumn air with pleasure and closed his eyes. Memories, joyful and bitter, bright and sad, suddenly flooded over him, carrying him back to the past. Their family wasn't particularly well off. Eleanor had worked as a librarian all her life and joked a little bitterly that fortunately she had managed to retire before the internet killed all the libraries. Arthur worked as a foreman at a factory, and all the short time he had free from work was spent rustling newspapers. He looked suspiciously at his wife and demanded good grades from his son. David loved his mother tenderly and was even a little afraid of his father, although he loved him with some strange, forced kind of love. This close person was a stranger to him, incomprehensible and unkind. It was terrible, but David couldn't change his attitude towards him. Perhaps when he grew up, the boy would have been able to understand his father better, to mend relations, but there wasn't enough time for that. Arthur died suddenly. The 9-year-old David was left with his mother, who became melancholic after her husband's death. It seemed she had lost not a grumpy, perpetually dissatisfied man who constantly suspected her of some mythical infidelities. She grieved as if she had lost a loving person. After school, David entered college, specializing in engineering. Soon he doubted the correctness of his career choice, but a relative helped him out. This was his mother's brother, George, who had a small garage workshop. There he repaired and resold cars, and this became an opportunity for his nephew. All this nonsense, all these lawyers and traders, it's all like this. Today they are needed, tomorrow they are not, he boomed in his smoke-stained bass, listening to his nephew's doubts. And what kind of work is it, God forgive me, for a real man, shuffling papers and deceiving others? Pooh! But I have a real job, a man's job. George proudly straightened up and began pounding his chest with a rather large fist, stained with machine oil that had permanently seeped into his skin. And I will always have clients and work, he continued. I will always earn a piece of bread with butter, and even with caviar if I want. And you, nephew, come work for me. I'll get you into the business. You'll start doing what they teach you in theory in your colleges, and you'll also start earning some money. Stop living off your mother. This was an argument, and a very serious one for David. He had long been trying to earn some money here and there. But all of this, combined with his mother's modest pension and his even more modest student stipend, was barely enough to live on. Working at the workshop clicked for David right away. He turned out to be a person with an innate technical knack and intuition. Everything he saw and did there interested him, and he wanted to know and be able to do even more. Yes, nephew, your hands, of course, are growing from the right place, George said. With these hands and more brains, you'd be priceless. You study, he barked menacingly as a disciplinary measure. David studied easily, with pleasure. In the evenings, on weekends, he worked in the workshop, quickly gaining practical experience. After just a year, he was calmly entrusted with independent car repairs, starting with simple cases, but over time, more responsible and complex ones. Time passed quickly, and 5 years later, by the time he graduated from college, he was already an accomplished master who, despite his youth, enjoyed a rather solid reputation. David, this is very good. I'm so happy. I'm so proud of you. Eleanor proudly stroked her son's brand new diploma with her palm. This is a very suitable profession for a man, she added, beaming. Yes, mother, you think so? David looked at his mother playfully. But if I were a lawyer now, that would be more prestigious. And my hands would be clean, he added, looking at his palms, covered in calluses, small abrasions, and indelible spots of technical oil. Stop it, son, that's nonsense, Eleanor replied. My dear brother of course talks a lot of unnecessary nonsense, but in this he is right. You have a wonderful man's profession, she smiled. Just don't laugh, son, but I always thought that the ideal family is when the husband is an engineer and the wife is a doctor. Mother, you're something else. David burst out laughing. Why a doctor specifically? Oh, that's silly. I, for example, will definitely never, under any circumstances, be able to love a woman doctor. It seems to me they are all somehow frozen. David and Eleanor laughed cheerfully and were happy together. The categorical nature with which the young man judged women doctors was not accidental. It was difficult to explain, but something related to medicine caused him some unpleasant feelings from early childhood. He desperately sabotaged trips to the clinic, screamed during appointments, and hid from the pediatrician called to the house. As an adult, Robert never even went to the clinic, being a healthy person, and completely convinced that a cough and a runny nose were not a reason to die. He habitually ignored medicine, just like seasonal colds, preferring to mind his own business. However, this time he couldn't avoid visiting medical institutions. Robert needed certificates to replace his driver's license. He had to go to the local clinic. "Who's the last?" Robert asked, approaching the office door, to the sufferers like himself sitting along the wall. "Not the last, but the next. I am," one of them mumbled, and receiving no response, looked up at the newcomer. "You'll be after me. Hey, after me. Do you hear? Man, are you deaf or something?" The man tried to attract attention indignantly. But the newcomer neither heard nor saw anything around him except for an incredible, otherworldly creature. It walked, or rather floated, down the shabby clinic corridor, attracting his gaze. The magical vision in the form of a short, slender young woman in a white coat fluttered past the frozen man and disappeared behind the office door. He sank down onto a chair next to the angry next in line, bewildered, and suddenly felt his heart pounding. He entered the office in a semi-conscious state, glad that it wasn't a doctor's appointment. A young woman sat at a desk by the window, and the sun's rays, tangled in strands of reddish hair, created a halo effect around her head. He could barely breathe from excitement. "Hello, come in, have a seat," a voice that seemed angelic to him said. "Any complaints? Are you taking any medications?" she asked. She didn't lift her head and was quickly writing something on a form lying on the desk in front of her. "What?" Robert foolishly repeated, unable to tear his eyes away from the doctor's golden glow. He was completely captivated, forgetting why he had come. His heart was pounding in his chest. "Are you taking any medications?" She raised her head and looked carefully at his face. Robert's breath hitched, blood rushed to his cheeks. His legs trembled with sudden excitement. What? That was all the unfortunate man could stammer out. The words stuck in his throat. He felt like a complete idiot. "All right, let me see your hands." She walked decisively towards the man sitting like a statue. He caught a light, barely perceptible scent of perfume, quite unusual. "Roll up your shirt sleeves higher, even higher, please. Good, you can lower them." "Look at me," she asked. "No, not like that," she added, extending her hands. With a soft movement, she lifted Robert's head, looking closely into his face. "Are you feeling unwell? Just please don't answer that." "What?" Robert predictably said. He couldn't help it, as if he was stuck. It was an automatic reaction. "Okay," she said, looking at the documents where his name was written. "Your behavior is, to put it mildly, a little strange. What's wrong with you?" She looked very carefully into his face again. "I love you, Doctor," Robert said in confusion. These words escaped him on their own, completely unexpectedly. He hadn't planned to say this. The doctor, as her badge read, froze. Her face, professionally focused, suddenly became bewildered. She clearly hadn't expected such a turn of events. "Do you need this certificate that badly?" she suddenly asked softly, sitting down next to him. "Yes, I'll write you the certificate." "You don't have to go to such extremes for that," she added, looking into his eyes. "No, doctor, no. This isn't for the certificate," he replied. "This is for life." And Robert, looking directly into her eyes, laughed loudly from the overwhelming feelings. A few months later, they got married. Robert's mother, Eleanor, happy and incredibly radiant from this happiness, constantly caught her son's eye. Several times, unable to resist, she would point her eyes at the young wife and giggle cheerfully, almost girlishly. Their love was not like all-consuming passion. They didn't need to be with each other every minute, every second of their lives. They didn't demand or expect sacrifice and selflessness from each other. It was enough for them that they had each other, and neither he nor she needed anything more. Although his wife did try to achieve something from her husband without success. "You know, you really should be observed," Sarah would say. "It's no joke, and your age is, let's say, not youthful anymore." "Well, I've brought problems upon myself," he grumbled in response. "I was living happily, and now I get a home medical examination," Robert continued. "Stop it. Everything is fine with me." "And anyway, the less you know, the better you sleep," he laughed, waving her off. She shook her head disapprovingly, words worthy of a teenager. "Okay, I won't force you. You're a big boy. It's your life." Sarah still managed to get Robert to undergo an examination. There he was examined for a long and tedious time, sat down, laid down, had some clips and suction cups attached. Then they looked at the examination results with a thoughtful expression and gave recommendations. As a result, they told him to exclude heavy physical exertion, eat less fried, smoked, spicy, and salty foods. In short, everything that tasted good. However, Robert didn't delve into the details at all. He just needed to calm his wife down. He was also prescribed some pills, which he swore to her with an honest face that he would take regularly. Naturally, he immediately completely forgot about them as soon as he left the house. Robert loved his wife very much and was completely happy. She, as far as he could tell, was quite content with life and would have been happy too, if not for one but. She desperately wanted a child, but despite all their efforts, the baby remained only a dream for now. "My dear, don't be so upset," Robert said, sitting next to Sarah on the sofa. "We'll have time. What's the rush? My own parents had me when they were almost 40, and look, I turned out okay. Do you have any complaints about me? Only substantial ones, please," he added with a smile. "Joker!" Sarah lightly tapped her husband's head with her fist. "It's all jokes to you." "Well, yes, you of course have nowhere to rush," she shook her head sadly. "You, my dear man, are like men and wine. You only get better with age. But I am a woman, you see. I only get older with years." "My dear, what nonsense." Robert looked at his wife in surprise. "Where did you pick up this foolishness?" He didn't understand her anxiety. "It's not foolishness, it's the truth," she replied. "Do you know what they call women like me in medicine if they are expecting a child?" Sarah looked questioningly at her husband. "Elderly primipara." She clearly pronounced the unpleasant word and smiled bitterly. "So you have everything ahead of you," she continued, "but I need to get moving, and you, by the way, too." She shook off her despondency and, as was her custom, ended the difficult conversation with a joke. "Do you hear, my beloved husband? Get moving." She jumped up from the sofa and stood in front of him, fists on her hips. Robert looked at his wife, girlishly slender, thin, light, with a head of red hair that had not faded at all with the years. He looked at her dear face, looked into her eyes, in which, as one of their friends said, devils dance. He felt the familiar, demanding, irresistible desire that had not faded with the years. He jumped up, grabbed his beloved, and the higher powers seemed to have heard this conversation. Exactly 9 months later, the elderly primipara, who had carried the entire pregnancy like a 20-year-old girl, gave birth to a boy easily and quickly. Robert, stunned by worries, unusual thoughts and anxieties, held his son for the first time. He looked fearfully at the pink, wrinkled face, and the answer was an unexpectedly serious gaze. "Red-haired," the happy father exclaimed. "Sarah, he's red-haired, just like you." He was delighted. "He's not red-haired at all." Mary took the child from her husband. He stood awkwardly bent, like all new fathers, afraid to move and drop the precious bundle. "He's just golden, our golden boy," she added tenderly. They named their son what they named him. Long awaited, suffered for, and late, of course, he was the light in their window, a joy and a hope for his parents. David grew up a healthy and intelligent boy. He didn't excel with special talents, but studied without failing, meaning he was average. He drew quite well, strummed the guitar, and, like all boys, sat engrossed in computer games. At least, he didn't become addicted, and allowed his parents to take him to the dacha with pleasure, where shashlik and pie awaited him. However, these family evenings and trips for three happened less and less often. The reason was Robert's busy work schedule, his business. By the time David turned 10, Robert was firmly on his feet, owning several workshops and car services. And it all started with that very workshop of George's, where he began working part-time from his first year of college. The childless, much older George completely handed over his workshop to his nephew a few years after David graduated from college. In doing so, he bargained for the right to come any time and, if he wished, as he put it, shake off the dust. He would join in on some simple repairs, but mostly his visits came down to discussing the skill and business acumen of the new owner. "Look at that," George would explain with pleasure and deep feeling to some old clients or friends. "It was me who made my nephew get into all this back then. Without me, he'd be shuffling papers somewhere, but with me, he became a master. And what a master. See? Honestly, he's already bought him all this equipment. It doesn't even fit in the place anymore. He tells me, I'm opening a second workshop. He says, I'm going to build a chain of services. What an idiot. Do you hear? Can you imagine how they'll tax him now? And he'll take out more loans for the equipment and for the rent and for the salaries of all those idlers. Does he need that? He should just sit quietly, turn his wrenches for bread and caviar. After all, he has golden hands and a head on his shoulders, God bless him. But no, he's getting into God knows what. George would break into an old smoker's cough, shake his head indignantly and wave his hands, while his eyes shone with pride for his nephew. Robert's business was large and troublesome. More and more time was spent on it, leaving little room for personal life. He almost dissolved into his work. Listen, there's something... Sarah looked at her husband carefully. David and I thought about it, talked it over, and decided to get a dog. Robert unexpectedly stayed home that evening and didn't rush off somewhere, as usual, on an urgent call. A dog? Robert was shocked and indignant. Do you have any idea what a dog in the house is? It's noise, fuss, fur, dirt. They bring all sorts of germs into the house. He thought for a moment and added, for some reason, fur everywhere, you understand. And most importantly, Sarah, you have to walk it, the dog, every day. Sarah looked at her husband mockingly, and at his last sentence she burst into cheerful laughter. Every day? Really? She shook her head, playfully feigning surprise. I honestly don't know what to say. You've simply amazed me. Imagine, walking every day. I always thought dogs peed once a week. You take it out, say, on Tuesday and forget about it until next week, she finished. Are you mocking me? Robert stated, looking at his wife, shaking with quiet laughter. He couldn't help but smile despite his indignation. Her laughter was contagious. He generally liked dogs, but preferred to do so at a distance, abstractly, so to speak. It just so happened that he never had pets in his childhood or youth. True, when he was about 12, to his considerable fright, he was given an aquarium with fish. Despite all his efforts, they somehow quickly and quietly died. Robert then felt a strange inner relief, which, of course, he carefully hid from his family. Keeping a dog, in his understanding, was an extremely complicated matter, involving endless chores. It was the necessity of doing things you absolutely didn't want to do, like dragging yourself out into the rain and slush instead of lying on a comfortable sofa. "Why do you need this?" Robert made another attempt to influence his wife. "Why do you need another dog?" "Don't you have enough worries with us?" he asked, hoping for understanding. Sarah looked into his eyes. "I don't have enough worries, can you imagine? And especially I don't have enough of you," she added, and withdrew her hands. Sarah moved away and sat on a stool. And then she suddenly added in a completely different tone. Hearing it, Robert looked up at her in surprise. He had never heard such a voice from her, dry, somehow alien. He felt anxious. "I don't understand why you're worried about the inconvenience of a dog. You're never home anyway. What difference does it make to you who lives here?" He gasped indignantly. And Sarah, without letting him object, continued, "I've wanted to talk to you for a long time, my dear. Let's talk now, since things have turned out this way. We miss you, you understand? Both of us. All your endless trips, business trips," she said. "You've been coming home only to sleep for a long time, and what's more, not even sleeping. We don't see you at night either. Do you think I don't know you've gotten into the habit of sleeping on the sofa in the living room?" "Sarah, I do that so I don't wake you up." Robert looked at his wife with indignation. He was very hurt that everything he considered his personal great sacrifice for the sake of the family was now being held against him. "Sarah, I work like a madman, earning money for you actually, so that you have everything. I do all this for you, by the way," Robert was almost shouting. "You don't have to do it for me," Sarah replied quietly. "Do you hear? If you want to do something for me, for David, just please be with us more often and longer." For some reason, Robert's throat constricted. "Sarah, I'll try," he said, and added, "Forgive me, my dear." It was very painful for him to hear her words. "Try. I forgive you." Sarah looked up at him. With a habitual gesture, she tucked her unruly red strands behind her ears and added mockingly, "And we're getting a dog anyway." A couple of weeks later, a funny, fat Labrador puppy, stumbling over its own paws, appeared in the house. "Oh, Sarah, you even chose a dog like yourself, just as red-haired." Robert stumbled, laughing foolishly. "No, what is it?" The Labrador's eyes were circling a certain coffee table with suspicious persistence. There, clearly within the puppy's reach, lay a plastic folder with business papers, and Robert really disliked the pet's close attention to it, as they called the young hooligan. "You're both somehow... Well, anyway, it's good with you," Robert managed to say. Immediately, with a mournful cry, he dashed from his spot. The puppy took only a second to steal the coveted folder from the table and try to hide with it in the depths of the apartment. Even when caught by the scruff of the neck, the pet tried to defend its prey, and the folder, finally in Robert's hands, was already considerably chewed and slobbered on. "Sarah, I take back my words," he shouted. "With you, yes, it's good. But with this parasite, it's impossible. What a scoundrel! And how did he manage to chew, tear, and slobber on everything so much in just a few seconds?" The puppy sat behind its mistress's legs with an almost human grin on its face, while she laughed cheerfully. This was just the beginning of their life together with the dog. While the pet grew, Robert lost count of the ruined shoes and scratched wallpaper. And as for how many carelessly left documents the tailed shredder ruined, it was impossible to count. At the same time, the pet stubbornly chose items that belonged to the head of the family. "He just loves you, you see." Sarah would laugh, comforting her husband. "He loves you in a special way. That's why he chooses things that are yours, that smell of you." That's how she tried to calm him down. "Well, then I should be the one to beat him," Robert joked gloomily. He sadly examined the latest evidence of the puppy's special love for him. He tried to hide his irritation with a joke. And yet Sarah, as always, turned out to be right. The pet became a true friend to all of them. It even united their already happy family. Everything collapsed in an instant. His wife was hit by a car driven by a drunk kid. She was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where she died a few minutes later without regaining consciousness. Robert learned about his wife's death by phone. They called him from her mobile phone. "My dear, hello," he shouted into the receiver, answering the call. "Listen, you're always scolding me, but imagine I threw everything aside and bought tickets for the three of us to the sea. So, we're flying on Monday. Go ahead. Arrange your leave at the hospital urgently. My dear, hello. Can you hear me?" He suddenly fell silent, feeling rather than hearing the suspicious silence on the line. And suddenly he became scared. The silence suddenly turned into something sticky and suffocating. It seemed to envelop him, making his heart beat faster and faster. "Excuse me?" An unfamiliar male voice sounded on the phone. "Are you the person listed in the documents?" he asked, giving Robert's name. Robert could barely stammer out a reply. "Yes," Robert rasped in a suddenly hoarse voice. His voice trembled, sensing disaster. The world around him seemed to stop. "And who is this woman to you?" the voice asked. He gave her full details. "Is this your spouse?" he clarified. "No, this is my wife," Robert replied, not understanding the word spouse. What kind of spouse was his beloved? A spouse was something large, awkward, tiresome, like an old wardrobe. But she was his wife, his beloved, his friend, his sunshine, his happiness for life. "I am very sorry, but I must inform you, there was an accident. She died without regaining consciousness. Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do." The unfamiliar voice continued to say something, and Robert held the phone, clenching his fingers. He was trying to grasp one simple thought. His wife, his beloved, his friend, his happiness for life was gone. The following days passed in a haze, a fog. He went somewhere or drove, did something, responded to words, handshakes, calls from people. He couldn't shake the feeling that all this was being done by his double, and he himself, the real one, was watching everything from the side. He saw his double take his wife's body from the hospital, how this very double sat silently next to the coffin, accompanied it to the cemetery, and lowered it into the grave. Then he, this very double, returned home, walked the despondent pet, hugged it, lay down on the sofa, and closed his eyes. The morning after the funeral, Robert was completely alone. Even that imaginary double, who had seemingly done all the hard work for him and seen his wife off on her last journey, disappeared. The morning was sunny and bright. He woke up because a sunbeam was dancing across his face, tickling and blinding him. "Who didn't close the curtains yesterday? Some housekeeper," he mumbled, getting out of bed. "My mood is terrible," Robert thought lazily. "Did I not get enough sleep or something? And Sarah ran off somewhere early in the morning. I wish she'd come back sooner." "She won't come. Never. You will never see or hear her again. Never." The thought flashed mercilessly in his head. And as if in response to this thought, something tore in his chest with unbearable pain. It felt as if it was crushing his ribs and tearing his insides, causing unbearable suffering. The frightened pet darted around its owner lying on the floor, yapping softly. David, frightened and sleepy, ran in at the sound of the howling, called an ambulance, which fortunately arrived on time. After suffering a heart attack, Robert, thinner and quieter, realized that he would have to learn to live again. To learn not to think in the mornings why his wife wasn't calling them for breakfast. To get out of the habit of waiting for weekends to rush out of town with the three of them, him, David, and her, taking the pet along. Not to remember that this American movie shouldn't be put on because his wife couldn't stand the lead actor. He was literally going mad from these constant involuntary slips into the past and the agonizing returns from there back to reality, where she was not. Having recovered a little, Robert started going not to the office, but to the car workshop. And the old faithful business, to which he had been devoted for so many years, reciprocated. It accepted him like a good friend, occupied his hands, time, and thoughts. Robert gladly put on his old oil-stained overalls, which he hadn't worn for many years, and to the astonishment of the mechanics and everyone else who looked at him like a demigod, he climbed into the inspection pit. At first, the service workers looked at him with surprise. They were uncomfortable in his presence. The eyes of those around him clearly read, "What whim has seized him? Some nonsense. The man has money to burn, and he's sitting under cars up to his ears in machine oil, bruising all his fingers, eating some rubbish. It's all incomprehensible, strange, and besides, he's here unnecessarily. Now we can't even sneak out for a smoke." Days passed, months went by, and he continued to work regularly in the workshop for several hours a day alongside everyone else. Accustomed to the owner's presence, the workers greeted him warmly and sincerely. If he, busy with his main big affairs, didn't come to the workshop, they understood that he was already missed. "Secretary, hello!" the mechanics would shout to the incredibly beautiful young woman from the central office. "Do you need the boss?" "He's in the third bay today," they would reply. The young woman would already habitually rush in the indicated direction with a stack of documents. Work binges. That's what the company's employees jokingly called the time when their boss disappeared into the workshop. It became his new ritual. He's gone mad. George, now very old but still grumbling at his workplace, diagnosed Robert. "Nephew, you were a fool then, and you still are, even though your head is grey now. You're the owner. Why are you clanking around with metal here?" he complained. "And what should I do? Shuffle papers?" Robert snorted. "And who taught me all my life that I should do a man's job?" he asked in return. He reminded the old man of his own words. "Well, I'm not taking back my words," George replied. "But you... well..." George was clearly flustered, not knowing what to say. It's still somehow wrong. "That's because you're alone," he continued. "You're lonely. That's why you're acting out." "You need a woman," the old man concluded. George, with his directness and spontaneity, hit the most painful spot. Robert was indeed very lonely. When his wife was with him, he wasn't alone for a single second of his life. He felt they were together, even if she was far away. But the pain was there, and it didn't go away. Eleanor and the pet were, of course, there, but David, his only beloved, precious son, did not fill the void that had appeared in his father's life. His mother's death, for some reason, didn't bring them closer, as it seemed it should have, but on the contrary, separated them. The 16-year-old David, having grieved for his mother loudly and demonstratively, withdrew into himself, into his own world. To his father's attempts to talk, to get closer, David responded with rude frankness. "Dad, let's be honest," the young man said. "You can't replace Mom for me anyway, and you were always a so-so father." "No, I have no questions about money and all that. No complaints there, but don't try to get inside my head. Robert was learning to accept this. David behaved quite decently, didn't demand anything extra, and had no bad or suspicious habits. But the feeling that he was living in the same apartment with an almost stranger, a completely unknown person, did not leave Robert. He should have been properly punished. George always expressed himself simply and categorically. But now what? He just shrugged his shoulders. And only the faithful pet, waiting for its owner at home, joyfully greeting his arrival, reminded him of his past happy life. This golden dog was a living bridge to the past. He was the only one who remained the same. On one of his binge days, Robert finally kicked the office workers, who had been bothering him with various questions for a long time, out of the workshop. He immersed himself with pleasure in a complex engine repair. The work completely absorbed him, and he didn't immediately notice the female voice coming from the small manager's office. I called, you booked me for a repair and now you won't take my car? This is outrageous. I won't leave on principle, do you hear? Hello? Robert, wiping his hands as he went, approached the workshop manager. The manager was listening to the woman with a suffering expression on his face. She was apparently very irritated. The lady accompanied her words with energetic gestures, clearly indignant. May I know what happened? He asked. He looked at the woman and smiled privately, though it was easy to smile at her sincerely. Despite her nervous state, the lady turned out to be a pretty young woman around 25. She had large grey eyes, a turned-up nose, and long, light, fluffy bangs that she constantly blew out of her face with a funny, loud exhale. "Hello!" she sharply turned to Robert. "Another specialist!" "Do I have to tell everyone my story here? Maybe instead of talking, one of you will finally work on my car?" she asked defiantly. "My dear young lady," Robert said softly. He was internally very surprised by the thoughtlessly but completely sincerely spoken word. After his wife's death, he had never felt anything remotely resembling emotion towards any woman. "I am not your dear young lady," the lady interrupted him decisively. She was in a combative mood and wasn't going to back down. Her eyes sparkled. "All right, not my dear, young lady." Robert didn't let her sidetrack him. "Let's calm down and figure out the situation." "What exactly happened?" he suggested. "Tell it again?" she gasped indignantly. She was clearly tired of repeating her story. She crossed her arms over her chest. "Manager!" Robert looked questioningly at the employee standing next to him. The manager had been staring at the problem all this time, clearly suffering from the situation. He was waiting for instructions. "It's simple," the manager stepped forward decisively. "The woman—" He glanced at the piece of paper he held in his hand, calling her by her name. "She did make an appointment with us, but during the phone conversation, unfortunately, she incorrectly stated the make of her car." "And now everything has become clear," the employee continued. "I tried to explain to the lady that we cannot repair her car because we don't have the equipment for cars of this make. She needs to go to a dealership, but she won't listen to me." "Well, there you go." The manager shrugged, making it clear what he thought of some ladies. "Understood," Robert, having listened to the manager, shifted his gaze to the woman and smiled slightly. "Was I mistaken?" he asked, addressing her by her name. "I'm afraid we really can't help you, but I'll write you the address now. Call there, and I think—" "Listen, I don't care what you think," she exclaimed. "Your sign says car service, right?" She pointed expressively with her hand at her car. "Car, right. So what?" She looked at Robert ironically. "So you're going to fix it?" The manager snorted, trying to stifle a laugh. He found the situation very amusing. He turned away to avoid laughing out loud. "Nonsense," the woman muttered, feigning inflexibility. Although it was already clear that she was tired of arguing, she decided to have the last word. "Fine. I promise I won't let this go. I'll complain to your superiors." "And not to some manager or any other boss," she declared. "I'll complain to your owner, the proprietor. I don't know anyway, the one who's in charge here." "Really, it's simply unbelievable. A client arrives and they're refused. What kind of business is this?" She looked indignantly at the workshop mechanics, who were suppressing laughter and eagerly awaiting the outcome. "Well, that's your right," Robert replied. "In that case, so as not to put things off, allow me to introduce myself." He stepped forward. "What do I care about you?" She stamped her foot in indignation. Her rather high heel twisted, the young woman swayed and would have fallen if Robert hadn't caught her arm. A light, barely perceptible scent of tart perfume wafted towards him, and her silky hair brushed his cheek for a second. And suddenly he felt excitement and surprise. He was alive again, immersed in these forgotten sensations, a little frightened by them. He didn't immediately understand what she was saying. The woman snatched her hand from his, which he was still holding. "Anyway, be prepared," she said. "You and you," she quickly pointed a finger at the manager and Robert. "I'll make sure you're fired. Clear?" She looked back indignantly at the service mechanics, who were now openly laughing. The next day, in the morning, he was working in his office at the firm's central headquarters. He was hardly surprised when the door burst open. The previous day's visitor entered the room rapidly, with a stubborn expression on her face. "Hello, I understand you are the owner of the car workshop in that area." She sat down decisively in the chair opposite him. "Well, I must tell you that with employees like the ones there, you'll soon go bankrupt. I bring my car, and they refuse to take it. The model, you see, isn't right. They've become completely insolent. Especially one guy there, not young," she continued. "Instead of doing his job, he decided to get acquainted with me. As if I care what his name is. He was tall." She smiled, then fell silent in confusion mid-sentence, finally looking at Robert. After a few seconds, she used a gesture familiar to him to brush the 2 long bangs from her face and smiled shyly. "Oh, it's you," the woman said in astonishment. "Yes, it's me," Robert replied. "My name is what it is, and I remember yours." He stood up from his desk and bowed gallantly. "You're a joker. You're the owner of this establishment, it turns out. Then why were you in the workshop looking like that? It's strange." "Well, why strange? It's quite normal," he replied. "It would be strange if I worked in the workshop in a suit. All right, young lady, let's leave aside my strange behavior. Let's rather decide what we should do about you." "Meaning?" she asked, surprised. The question stumped her. She didn't understand what he was talking about. "Well, how?" Robert asked. "You probably understand. I cannot fulfill your demand to fire everyone, including myself," he said seriously. It was obvious. The young woman looked at him and unexpectedly burst out laughing. The laughter was so sincere and infectious that Robert couldn't help but laugh with her, easily and cheerfully as he hadn't laughed in 2 years, since those terrible times. "Well, yes, I guess my complaint is hopeless," the young woman said, still sobbing with laughter. "Well, okay," she added, addressing him by his name. "It was nice meeting you, despite everything." She stood up from the chair and extended her hand to him. He took the thin, narrow hand in his and involuntarily covered it with his other hand, holding it for a moment. "Young lady, forgive my boldness," Robert said. "But perhaps you would agree to have dinner with me as compensation for us not repairing your car?" After all, I still have to respond to your complaint, don't I? He said, surprised by his own words. Robert suddenly, for the first time since his wife's death, wanted to talk to a woman. He wanted to touch her hand again, to feel the light, subtle scent of perfume with some unusual tart fragrance. For him, this was a completely new sensation, because all his life there had only been two women for him, his mother and his beloved wife. All other representatives of the fair sex, even the most beautiful and intelligent, were simply people to him. He was hopelessly lost to romantic adventures. Women's charms, which were repeatedly tried on him, simply didn't work. He loved his wife, wanted to be only with her, and the thought of experiencing any new sensations related to women simply did not occur to him. "Well, of all things, I'm sure of his faithfulness," Mary used to laugh. "Your husband, by the way, is a catch. Where is he now? Do you even know? At work, you say? Oh, watch out. You'll sit around in your sweatpants and someone will steal your man." "Well, if they do, then that's fate," Mary would reply philosophically, but she was being sly. For some reason, she was completely confident in her man. Every day she saw in his eyes that her confidence was justified. "So, do you accept the offer?" He looked into the young woman's face and smiled. He waited for an answer, feeling like a boy. His heart started beating faster again. "You know what? I do accept," the young woman suddenly replied. She smiled back, and the world around them seemed to light up. Robert felt a surge of energy. The 20-year-old young woman was charming. At the same time, she didn't try at all to make a special impression on Robert, to charm or seduce him. Apparently, she didn't care if her hair was perfectly styled or if she had eaten all her lipstick along with her steak. By the way, she had an excellent appetite, and in her company, Robert ate with real pleasure for the first time in 2 years. Despite the age difference of more than 20 years, they found an astonishing number of common topics for conversation. For example, the young woman learned about the Labrador pet and was indescribably delighted, turning out to be an old dog lover. Despite the somewhat scandalous beginning of their acquaintance, she turned out to be a light-hearted, cheerful, kind person. "I don't even know what came over me," she laughed, recalling the scene she had made at the workshop. "Honestly, I've never acted like that before. And here I felt like I'd gone off the rails. Please forgive me," she added, addressing him by his name. "But first of all, not by the name you used, but just by my first name," Robert gently chided her. "We agreed, young lady. And secondly, for your spectacular appearance, I'm glad things turned out this way," he added. "And I'm glad, very much," the young woman suddenly replied. She looked into his eyes and smiled. That evening changed everything. A year later, Robert, looking younger, with shining eyes and straightened shoulders, sat in his office. He held a small velvet box in his hands. Inside lay a luxurious ring. It was a ring for his young woman. "I love her," he thought. "I love this young woman, perhaps as much as I loved Mary once, or almost as much. I don't know, what's the point of comparing? I just want her to be by my side as my wife, always, or at least for as long as possible." He became agitated, jumped up, and paced around the office. "Okay, what if she says yes? What if she just ignores my age, everything, and agrees?" "She's like that, she might. What will I do?" Robert thought. Robert was afraid to voice the most important, essentially the only problem, his son. David and his possible reaction to all this, to a new woman, to a father who suddenly decided to continue living, not just live out his days. "David, I need to talk to you," Robert began. Every word was a huge effort for him. He couldn't sit still. He jumped up, paced the room, went to the window. He deliberately and carefully straightened a fold in the curtain. Then he walked back to the armchair he had just been sitting in, sat down, but after a couple of seconds he stood up again. David hadn't said a word all this time, watching his father. The silence was clearly dragging on, the tension growing. "Dad," David finally said, "maybe you'll tell me what you wanted." The young man broke the silence. "What did I want to say?" Robert asked, meaninglessly, nervously smoothing the perfectly ironed collar of his shirt across his chest. His hand was visibly trembling. He felt awkward. "David, well, it's difficult for me to talk about this, but I want to be honest with you. I'm really counting on you to support and understand me." "In short, I met a woman," he finally said, what seemed to him the most difficult words of his life. "She's good, smart, decent, beautiful, generally. I like her very much, and, it seems, strangely enough, she likes me too." "I wanted to introduce you to her," Robert mumbled, not daring to look up at his son. "And Mom," came from above him. "What about Mom?" David asked, his voice cold. He waited for an answer. "David," he finally looked the young man in the eyes. "Mom is gone. She's been gone for a long time. I loved your mother very much, David, very much, and I still love her and miss her terribly." "You know that perfectly well," his father added. "Miss her? Really? Well, I'll be," David snorted ironically. "But I see that doesn't stop you from having affairs," he added bitterly. His words hurt his father. "Don't you dare talk to me in that tone." Robert found the strength to look sternly at his son. "And choose your words, please," he demanded, feeling the tension rising. This was the beginning of the conflict. "Listen, father," David called him father for the first time in his life, not dad. This unfamiliar, somewhat alien, as if forged word unpleasantly grated on Robert's ear. "Maybe this is some kind of joke? You're probably playing a trick on me? Well, admit it." "No, David, I'm not playing a trick on you," Robert replied. "This is not a joke. I really want to introduce you to this woman. I would like—" He didn't finish the sentence. "I don't want to meet any woman," the young man shouted. His voice trembled with anger and resentment. He didn't even want to hear about it. "Not that one, but another one," Robert corrected his son, saying the young woman's name. He tried to bring clarity to this emotional conversation, but it didn't help. "It doesn't matter. I don't care," David yelled. "I don't give a damn, understand? Don't you dare bring her here. Understood?" he shouted, his voice rising to a shriek. "All right then." Robert got up from the armchair and paced the room. He barely restrained himself from slapping his son. "I dare remind you that this is my apartment, and I will decide what I do." "Both now and later, do you hear me?" he asked. He looked at his son, his gaze firm. "And if you don't like something, well, let's decide. Are we going to live together or not?" He put the question squarely. Robert's voice didn't tremble and didn't betray the turmoil that was going on in his soul and head right now. It seemed he managed to look decisive and firm. David stopped shouting and silently watched his father intently. And suddenly he blurted out, "Are you really going to kick me out of the house because of some—" "Careful, David," Robert interrupted him sharply. "Careful. Think before you say something that cannot be forgiven or corrected later," he warned. "Dad, what are you doing? You're already over 50, and your heart is acting up." David had apparently changed tactics. He brought forward the heaviest, most ruthless arguments. "What kind of courting can there be at your age? It's time for you to retire. Think about your pension." "And you suddenly decided to start courting women in your old age," the young man almost shouted, having completely crossed all boundaries. Robert listened to his son's hysterical shouts. Of course, the young man, overwhelmed by resentment and jealousy towards a strange woman, was clearly overdoing it. With the maximalism with which 16-year-olds judge older generations, the young man was spouting outright nonsense. And yet Robert clearly understood the wall of rejection and misunderstanding he would have to face. "Lord, what am I doing?" Robert suddenly thought clearly, continuing to listen to his son's screams. "What am I doing?" "She's half my age, and David's reaction is typical." Everyone, absolutely everyone, will think this, if not say it, he realized. Yes, yes, of course I'll marry you," the young woman exclaimed enthusiastically, forgetting modesty. "I really want to be your wife," she added, her eyes shining. It was a happy moment. "Thank you, my dear. I'm so happy," Robert replied. "Only forgive me. We need to talk." He struggled to choose and push out the words, although he had already gone over this conversation 1,000 times in his mind. "You see, I'm, to put it mildly, not a young man," he mumbled. "I understand perfectly, the young woman snorted. "I'm not a girl either." She understood what he was getting at. "My dear, but you know what I mean?" He sighed agonizingly. It was hard for him to talk about this. He felt guilty. "Yes, I know, of course," her voice became harsh. "You are significantly older, and I am unforgivably young. And I'm marrying you solely for your money, to take everything you have and run off abroad with a young lover. Oh, and another thing, you have a bad heart. I can take advantage of that, finish you off, and voila, I'm the heiress to everything." "They will definitely tell you this many times too," she finished defiantly. "My dear," he exclaimed, "no, let's talk." "Let's say all this nastiness out loud," Robert suggested. "I know all this perfectly well," she replied, "and I also know that you are ruining everything right now." "You are ruining possibly the happiest moment of my life," the young woman added. "My dear, my darling, let's do this." She wiped away her tears, raised her face, and looked intently into his eyes. "Either you believe me completely and entirely, in my sincerity, in my feelings for you. Or right now we say goodbye to each other," she concluded firmly. He looked into her eyes and believed, once and for all. At least, at that moment, he thought it was forever. The young woman moved into their large apartment. David, by then a second-year college student, was living in a dormitory. The relationship between David and his new mother, despite all Robert's hopes, was, to put it mildly, separate. Robert, his new wife, and David, their life became even more incomprehensible and unpredictable. Something was clearly happening between the young man and his stepmother. Robert tried many times to find out what exactly, but without success. "David, what's going on?" Robert asked. He couldn't understand what was happening between him and his new wife. Tension hung in the air. "Listen, Father, I'm a man. You yourself pointed that out to me recently." "Yes, you helped," David snorted ironically. "Well, actually, you created this problem yourself. You're talking about this woman. I'm talking about my life." "That's it. Leave me alone," the young man cut him off. "David, don't you dare talk to me like that." His father tried to call him to order, but then he gave up, unable to find the right words. "David, how about I buy you an apartment?" Failing to get anything from the young man, he tried another approach. "My dear, we need to talk. What's happening between you and my son?" "My dear, I won't say everything is perfect, but basically, it's nothing too terrible. A typical story about a stepmother and stepson. Well, you know, stepmothers are generally not good, but I'm trying very hard, and anyway," she trailed off. Robert felt that something very important was hidden behind his son's aggression and his new wife's playfulness. And this something didn't let him live in peace. It bothered him like a sore tooth. And so he sat on the bench in the park, stroked the pet's golden ears, and wondered what to do. How to understand what was happening in his home, what was hidden behind the facade. And if he suddenly heard something resembling the truth from one of them, he simply wouldn't have the courage to believe it. He had to see and understand everything himself, on his own. And he would have to do it without David and Sarah knowing, however unpleasant it was for him to secretly watch them. "Deputy, hello?" Robert dialed his deputy's number. "Give me, please, the phone number of the company that installed our video surveillance system." He had made a difficult decision. The next day, a quick young man taught Robert the intricacies of surveillance. "The camera is tiny. You can install it anywhere," he explained. "Better higher up, so they don't accidentally bump into it." The technician lowered his voice mysteriously. "There's no sound, but the image will be of the highest quality at any distance. The company guarantees it." Having installed the camera in the living room, Robert went to work. He sank tiredly into the armchair in his office and turned on his laptop. There was no sound, but the image was clear, just as the technician had promised. David was the first to come home. He wandered around the apartment, then returned to the living room and settled directly opposite the camera, turning on the huge wall-sized TV. The young man sat on the sofa in a relaxed, casual pose. Alone in the apartment, he had no need to play the role of the offended or deprived. His face, so similar to his mother's, so dear and precious, caused a pang of aching, sharp love for his son in the father watching the monitor. He agonizingly wanted to drop everything, run home, grab this long-legged, tousle-haired, snub-nosed creature, his boy, and hold him tightly. To ask forgiveness for everything done and not done, to say how much he loved his son. Lost in his feelings, Robert didn't immediately realize that something was happening in the apartment. His son's posture changed. He remained on the sofa, but he tensed up, as if bristling. His face took on the familiar sullen, angry grimace, like a mask. On the sofa, instead of the sweet, nice boy, a copy of his mother, sat a watchful, awkward young man from whom anxiety and aggression literally emanated. His new wife entered the room. Judging by the movement of their lips, they spoke. Sarah smiled slightly, apparently asking David something. He, slouching further on the sofa and putting his feet up on the glass table, put on a crooked smirk and, obviously, replied, squinting and barely parting his lips. Sarah turned and left the room. Robert couldn't hear what they were saying, but one thing was obvious. David was not at all like a miserable outcast with a cruel stepmother sufferer. And his new wife clearly hadn't turned into a fury in her husband's absence. Rather, it seemed that David was behaving in his usual rude manner, and Sarah was trying to smooth things over with patience and calmness. Robert, not knowing why, continued to watch his son sitting in the living room. The young man suddenly looked in the direction where his stepmother had gone. He got up and, with cautious movements, clearly trying not to make noise, moved towards his father's office. Having disappeared from the frame, he reappeared on the monitor a couple of minutes later, and one hand was tucked into his jeans pocket. It looked very much like he had just put something in there. His chest ached in the usual place on the left. Robert gasped with pain. At that moment, he suddenly felt like an ancient old man who didn't even have the strength to move his legs. So, his son had betrayed him after all. His son, not his new wife, was tormenting her and, it seemed, was quietly taking money from the safe in the office. Well, at least that was quite easy to find out by checking the contents of the safe. That same evening, returning home, Robert discovered that a rather substantial amount had significantly dwindled in the few weeks he hadn't looked in his safe. He didn't talk to his son, but simply waited, not knowing what for. And he waited. His suspicions were confirmed. A few days later, he saw his son carry a small rectangular box out of the office, in which his first wife's few but expensive pieces of jewellery were kept. She loved wearing jewellery, calling it our golden reserve. "I need to talk to you," Robert said the next evening. He decided on this conversation, although his heart clenched. It was time for the truth. "Well?" David snapped back habitually. He was wary, sensing an approaching storm. His posture became closed. "Money has been disappearing from our house, and not just money." One had to give the young man credit. He tried his best to appear calm and indifferent, but he wasn't very good at it. Fear showed through the mask. "Why are you so sure I took the money?" He smiled awkwardly, or rather grimaced, hiding his fear behind it all. "There's another person in our apartment, a complete stranger, by the way." "Maybe we should ask her. What if our young wife is short on cash?" he added venomously. "All right then," Robert ground out the words through clenched teeth, feeling the familiar dull pain in his chest. "The money, of course, if it's still intact, you can keep. Give back the jewellery and get out," he ordered. David left the room. A few minutes later, he returned, his face contorted with emotion. "Here's all your money." He threw a wallet at his father's feet. "I didn't take a single ruble. You can count it." "And I won't give you the jewellery," the young man shouted. "They will be kept by me. You can call and file a report about theft. I don't care. I won't give them back, even if they put me in prison. These are Mum's jewels. I won't allow some strange woman to wear them. Do you hear?" he finished, his voice breaking. By the end of the sentence, David's voice, trembling more and more, finally broke completely, and the young man, unable to bear it, sobbed. Robert stared at his son. The shell of bitterness, cynicism, and lies seemed to be licked away from the young man's face before his eyes. Standing before him was his beloved, only son, his and his first wife's, their golden boy. He was confused and lost in his fantasies and delusions, but he was still his own boy, still hopelessly missing his mother. He had driven this longing so deep within himself that it had turned into hatred towards his father, towards the new woman, towards the entire world around him where his mother was not. "David, forgive me," Robert said softly. He extended his hand, feeling the tension ease. It was the first admission. David looked up at his father, his face wet with tears. Quietly, in a barely audible whisper, he said, "And you forgive me, Dad?" "Forgive me for this, and for her," he added. "I love you, Dad." Robert took a few steps and squeezed his son's outstretched hand with all his might. And around them jumped, yelping with happy barks and shining with golden fur, not knowing what he was happy about, the faithful pet. At that moment, they became a family again,